On Radio National now, the Religion Report with John Cleary.
Thank you, Peter, and welcome to this special evening edition of today's Religion Report. According to press reports today, the Pope is having a hard time making headway with the Orthodox Church in Georgia. Orthodox Christianity has, in the decade since the collapse of the Berlin Wall and the end of 70 years of communist isolation, gone through an immense upheaval. Today we look at the rich tradition of Orthodoxy and the impact of 10 years in the winds of change. The ancient sounds of Greek Orthodox Christianity. Thomas Hopko is Professor of Theology and Dean of St. Vladimir's Seminary in the United States. He's one of the world's preeminent Orthodox scholars and teachers. On a recent visit to Australia, he came into our studios to chat about the impact of the end of communism on world orthodoxy and on the revival of interest in Orthodox spirituality.
Well, I think, as most people know, the countries where the Christians were primarily, if not almost exclusively, members of the Eastern Orthodox Church were the countries that were Marxist until very recently. Certainly the countries that were in the former Soviet Union, plus the eastern countries of Bulgaria, Yugoslavia, Romania, and then in Albania, of course, is a significant number of there are a significant number of Eastern Orthodox Christians as well. And when Marxism fell, then the churches had to, rise to the new occasion of being not persecuted and not oppressed and free, without really an experience of how to do that, because virtually all of the Christians in those countries had never had that experience ever in history.
And that goes back before communism.
Oh,
it goes
yes,
under the old Ottoman Turks.
Yeah, Ottoman Turks or Russian imperialism or Byzantine Empire. It never was a situation of, a type of liberal society, at least somehow democratic society, self-determining. The church, without a czar or a commissar or a sultan, didn't know quite how to behave itself.
And of course that very issue you mentioned, the emergence into a liberal society, is I guess best exemplified in the tensions within Russia about how to handle religious pluralism.
Oh yes, of course. I mean, the debate about the law of religious liberty and the pretension or the hope among many Russians that Russian Orthodoxy would again become a kind of an established church for the new and modern Russia. Of course, that's not going to happen, and it won't happen. But many folks are very unhappy about that, and don't really know how to work in the present situation, right? And there is xenophobia still. I mean, the traditional suspicion, to use probably the easiest word, of the West, of Western Christians even, is still very much there in Eastern Christians, even from, many would see, even NATO activity in the former Yugoslavia as some kind of a resurgence of crusades or some such thing,
And one of the consequences is this emergence of a new flexibility or freedom in Orthodoxy to reinvent, rediscover itself, is a remarkable dialogue that's begun over recent years between what were previously quite disparate groups, such as American evangelicals and
Right.
Orthodoxy.
Yeah, I recently went to a meeting of journalists and media people in Chicago, and they said Eastern Orthodox Christianity is one of the 5 hot topics in the U.S. today, in publishing and in media, because of the interest not only in, Kosovo or Russia or the fall of communism or whatever, but also because of the spiritual search, and because of the ecumenical movement as well. Because a lot of caricatures were broken down. I mean, when I was a child, people thought of Eastern Orthodoxy either as a Protestantism of the Eastern tradition or as a kind of Roman Catholicism without discipline and without the Vatican. But people now see that, no, there's an organic tradition of Christianity that runs through the eastern part of the old Roman Byzantine Empire that has a history of its own, liturgically, sacramentally, spiritually. Holistic views are in, and the Eastern Orthodox Church is a very material church. Someone said you can't leave Orthodox worship without crumbing, dripping, chewing, and aching, because you stand and you prostrate yourself and you get blessed with oil and water and you get fed bread and you walk around and you make processions and you kiss icons and you smell the smoke and all that kind of thing. Yeah, it's rooted in Christ and the gospel and the Word of God. I remember once an Orthodox priest being asked on a panel, what religion are you closest to? And he said Judaism, as opposed to Western Christianity, because of the ethos, kind of the style. And I think people are searching, and people also are searching for roots, I think, in spiritual identity. And of course, our church would serve that need as well. But the new phenomenon in America, of course, also is that you just have many, many people coming in to be members of the Orthodox Church who are not from these cultures at all. We have 10 bishops on our synod. 8 of them are converts to Orthodoxy. 8 of them were not born and raised in the Orthodox Church. They converted at university, or they're somewhere along the line somehow. And in our seminary, for example, more than half the students were not born into the Orthodox Church. So, and the teaching is all in English, the worship is in English, American English.
There's some interesting distinct parallels between Australia and the United States in this tradition. I mean, Australia looks at the United States and says, well, how is it working out there? And of course, the interesting discussion recently has been over the new appointment of a new Greek Orthodox Archbishop in the United States, in which Archbishop Stylianos of Sydney was one of those people named as possible candidates.
Yes, that's true. Yes, I mean, we heard that. And I believe that when the former Archbishop retired, Iakovos, I'm certain, Archbishop Stylianos here from Australia was one of the 3 church leaders, sent to the U.S. To kind of visit the churches, go through the diocese, have a feeling of the people, and to help the Synod of the Patriarch of Constantinople to appoint a person to that position. So, and so since he was there, of course, people thought perhaps he was one of the candidates, and certainly he was mentioned as a candidate, definitely. And then when the man who was appointed did not work out well, and there was quite opposition, so that the Patriarchate had to replace him, which they just did, then again, the name of Archbishop Stylianos was raised, that perhaps he would be the one who was sent. But the person who was sent was the new Archbishop Demetrios Trakatellis of Restina. He was a professor at Harvard and a New Testament scholar. He's 71 years old, extremely popular, and I think that the Patriarchate had to find the most popular person they could right now, because the church was not in good shape because of them.
And the reason for that tension, did it have anything to do with this old culture versus new culture?
I don't think so, personally. Sometimes it was cast that way. For example, Byzantine as opposed to America, Phanarite, or, as opposed to liberal democracy of America. But in all honesty, I don't think that was the issue. I think that the issue just was, sometimes it just happens that a person gets appointed who just doesn't work out. But what I do think a very important issue is, how does a church that has never functioned in a what you could call liberal democracy function? How does it learn how to do it? If it's only functioned as an established church of a state, like in Greece or in Russia, or in a millet system of the Ottoman Empire, where the bishops were given civil authority over all of the Rumi, they were called Romans, which meant Christians, in the Ottoman Empire, collecting their taxes, trying the criminals, being ethnarchs, leaders of minority peoples in the Turkish yoke. And don't forget, except for Russia and Montenegro, all of the traditional Eastern Orthodox Christian countries were in the Ottoman Empire for 500 years. Well, a certain way of behavior developed, a certain way of acting, of how to treat your bishop and so on. And the problem also is that in our time you had what I like to call an information explosion, where people who never had read documents of early Christianity began to read them. And in the early Christian documents, you could hear bishops described in the 2nd century as icons of God in the community, who act in the person of Christ. Well, when you take that kind of rhetoric, what it meant in a 2nd century city church, and what it can mean in a post-Ottoman, post-Tsarist, where the bishop wears a crown and so on, and all that rhetoric is used to practically make him into an infallible autocrat. Then you plunk that down in modern or postmodern New Jersey or Australia. Wow, it becomes really something to handle. And if I would say this, if as you mentioned, it will take a while for the Orthodox Christians in the former Marxist countries to learn how to cope with the new situation. We, in places like United States and America, and in the United States we have more than a 200-year history, we're still learning how to do that with various degrees of success. It's not easy at all, not at all. And of course, what has happened to Western Christianity since Vatican II, since, whatever, that's not for me to comment on, but that certainly has complicated the issue even more. Because it used to be clear what an Orthodox was, what a Lutheran was, what an Episcopalian or an Anglican, what a Roman. That's not that all clear anymore. And every church is going through its own, identity crisis. And
a defining fact of that is the issue of women.
And women, it's probably the number one issue, the publication of our St. Vladimir Seminary Press on a book called Women in the Priesthood, which is a second edition of a book that we published originally in 1981, reflecting on that issue within our church. And why are we even reflecting on it? It's because of what has happened in the other churches, and so the whole gender issue is a big one. And not only women in the priesthood, but the issue of sexuality, marriage, family, authority, freedom. I mean, all of that, it's with us, in a way that you can hardly even assess.
With most of this century, as you say, being spent behind repression, how are these churches now beginning to cope with the external tensions?
Western missionaries are coming into the countries that were traditionally Orthodox, who are very wounded, who don't have money, who don't have materials. So you have, let's say, American groups who had no history in those countries whatsoever, not only what you'd usually think of, let's say Roman Catholics and Protestants, but also Jehovah's Witnesses, Mormons, those types of groups, with lots of money, lots of materials in the languages of the people, in Bulgarian language or Ukrainian language or Romanian or Russian. Jehovah's Witnesses have their World Assembly in Bucharest, that type of thing. And this has irritated immensely the local Orthodox peoples, especially the leaders, who say, we were under oppression for so many years. We went to these ecumenical meetings. These were our brothers and sisters in Christ that we're going to work together. The minute freedom comes, they come in and start taking our people. So I think that's probably the single greatest reason of saying, let's just quit. If that's the way it's going to be, let's just quit, because we thought we were having a dialogue, and it turns out that's not as it seems.
So
to
the
be.
tension is as much cultural as it is theological.
Yeah, and the tension is political. And in other words, for example, I know more about, let's say, I don't know. Well, I know quite. I've been in the last 5 or 6 years. I've been in Romania. I've been in Bulgaria. I've been in Slovakia. I've been in Albania, and I've been in Russia. And in every one of those countries, the big anti-ecumenical people, their main argument is they're coming in, treating us as if we weren't even Christians, and giving, scholarships and money and Bibles and so on to our people, and setting up churches, which our laws now do, in fact, allow them to do. Russia tried to make a law at least to hold it back, a kind of tariff law, if you hadn't been here for so long, if you don't have... But, of course, that wasn't going to float, and I don't think anybody would really support that to the end, because even politically it'd be counterproductive, and unjust. But in any case, I think that's the main cause for the animosity. It's not theological as such, you know. And then we in the West, who would also question them, we would be considered to be, you know, not really loyal Orthodox, or, you know. I myself, I spoke at Moscow University in 1991 to a huge gathering of students from all over the former Soviet Union, because in 91 it still was the Soviet Union. But there were groups of Orthodox, Russian Orthodox outside the university picketing me because I came from America, and, you know, who am I to tell them anything? And the Americans are always the foes, and were tainted because they knew that I participated in ecumenical activity. So that kind of... you know, they burned the two former deans of our school, Father Alexander Schmemann and Father John Meindorf. Their books were burned in Russia. I wouldn't say happily, because you should not rejoice in wrong, but the folks who burned them since have been proven to be very immoral people and have been punished for their immorality, and suspended from their church positions. But this... you know, East-West thing is still very, very much alive, definitely. It's to the point where even we Orthodox in the West are somehow considered to be tainted. For example, some really talented people from those countries have had the opportunity to study in the West, and by now even to get doctorates, like at Oxford or with us in America and so on. And when they go back home, they can't get jobs because they studied in the West, you know. And therefore, they're kind of suspect by the people who said, we endured communism, we endured prison, we endured all this stuff, and now these people are coming in, taking over our people, and we're going to send our people there to study yet? You know, I mean, this is their attitude, and it's going to take a while to change it. Plus, we should remember that still the majority of the leaders of the churches in those countries did come into their positions under the Marxist system.
Yes, it's a real generational change.
Yes, it's
really,
a generational change, yeah.
A great time to be alive and in your position.
Yeah, you know, and we believe in divine providence, you know. I think it was a Roman Catholic Saint Catherine, a medieval saint, who said, everyone in hell will hear a voice that said, why didn't you love your time? Why didn't you love your place? And so we've got to love our time and place, and this is where we are.
Father Thomas Hopko, Professor of Theology and Dean of St. Vladimir's Seminary in the United States. Well, that's it for today. Thanks to John Diamond and Lynn Gallagher for production. But if you'd like a copy of today's program, you can look us up on the web at www.abc.net.au/rn.
Across Australia, this is Radio National.